Welcome, everybody, to Reaper Point Volcanology, a narrative series. Please clear some time, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Assembly 1. I realized I was daydreaming, staring out the window of my room at the snow being swept in cyclones between buildings, dragging myself out of the slouched, reclined position in my chair that I had slid into required concerted effort. I rubbed my face idly and checked the temperature heads-up display I had on my desk next to the computer monitor. 20 below 0 Celsius was actually pretty good for September in Reaper Point. The computer monitor was displaying a drawing of a small metal bracket I was working on for the jet sled. Spacing out when I was trying to think was a bad habit of mine. Made all so much worse since I was the only one home all day. I had Fridays off work. Something about the density of the century-old concrete walls that comprised the majority of buildings in Reaper Point began to feel oppressive over time. The pastel colors the interiors always got painted did little to hide the raw utilitarian nature of the structures. Drowning in thoughts of concrete, a muffled thud from downstairs betrayed someone arriving and saved me from my boredom. Seeking some form of mental stimulation, I stood from my chair and grabbed my phone. I quickly surveyed the diminutive, cube-shaped room. It contained a medium-sized tool chest, a bed, a chair, and a desk. Small trinkets and half-finished projects littered many of the surfaces, but none that I needed before leaving. Satisfied, I left the room and wandered down the second-floor hallway past the other second-floor room to the stairwell. The stairs exited on the first-floor common area adjacent to the front door and garage. "Welcome home, Sarah," I cheered, my arms stretched wide, betraying oversatisfaction at the human contact. "Hey, Kev, how's your day off?" she replied, looking down at the cup of tea she was making in the kitchen area left of the stairs. She still had her bright yellow thermal onesie half on, the arms tied around the waist. The high-visibility color contrasted the gray crew neck she wore underneath. "A mixture of bored and lazy. I really need to find a better way to spend Fridays outside of sled racing season." Sarah mumbled a reply and leaned back on the counter, cupping the mug to warm her hands. She looked pensive and finally spoke. "I wish I had the same time off. The RPV has been running me ragged lately, but I know that I would end up feeling like I should be busier if I did get time to myself." "What's been going on?" "Lots of new seismic activity, mostly on the west side of the mountain. She sighed, her expression morphing to frustrated confusion while she thought, and ended up rubbing her eyes with her thumb and forefinger of her free hand tiredly, a feeling I could relate to. "I just wish I knew what was going on. Shareholders have been breathing down my neck for answers when I don't have any." There was a pause. "Now probably isn't a good time to mention the ration pickup is tomorrow morning, right?" I gave her a semi-cringe, sympathetic look. "Oh, shit. I forgot about that. Don't worry. I can pick it up," I interjected. "Gives me an excuse to take the jet sled out." She smiled a bit, easing the perpetual scowl on her face, and nodded. She then set the mug down and waddled over to the front door where the rest of the thermal suits were hung. I took the time to sit down in one of the chairs surrounding the kitchen table and pull out my phone. 7 p.m. She had worked late. She slipped out of and hung up her thermal suit. Sarah was relatively tall, with athletic proportions. Her brown hair was cut short. Together with her resting scowl, gave her a naturally commanding aura. Her personality often matched that aesthetic. She marched over and spread out in the chair across the table from me. Sarah spoke first. "Thanks for taking the reins on some of that admin work. I feel bad because I'm almost a decade older than you and Emily, and a decade and a half older than Evan. You'd think I could handle more of it." I scoffed. "Oh, shut up. You're so busy leading the RPV research department, I don't think anyone could take care of 3 kids and that at the same time." I reconsidered. Well, 1 kid and 2 quasi-adults. "I'm sure Evan might have something to say about not being included in quasi-adult," she retorted playfully. I chuckled. She spoke again. "I've got a lot of magma simulation to run this weekend, so if you need anything, I'll probably be in my room." Amazing how they got you working over the weekends, too, I said while getting out of my chair and starting towards the freezer. She raised her eyebrows in agreement. I opened the freezer door and surveyed the contents. A couple plastic vacuum bag sealed metal containers and a lot of empty shelf space. So I'm assuming Emily and Evan are having their weekly family dinner tonight? I probed while still searching through the contents. Does today start with fry and end with day? Thank you. I pulled out 2 packages from the freezer and began shucking the wrappers from the tins. I poked a couple buttons on the flash oven, a small kiln used to reheat the rations we were provided. The device was placed on the kitchen counter. I dropped the 2 rations in, closed the door, and started the cycle. You finished that design you were working on? She asked once I returned to my chair. Not really. I didn't have that creative vigor today. I'll finish it before the week starts so I can make it on the machines at work on Monday. She nodded. You know, the cost of that material comes out of my department's budget, buddy. I held up a finger in front of my lips to shush her. Just put it on my tab. She shook her head. I continued. Those shop guys would do anything to subvert the engineering and research departments. Doubly so if it's for sled racing. It'll be like it was never even there. I waved a hand in the air as if casting a spell to emphasize my point. I'm going to be forced to have a conversation with them at some point. They scared off another engineer who found himself unfortunate to get lost down there. The oven chimed behind me and I stood to collect our dinner. They're the best there is, I rebutted. I understand they can be a bit, or even quite abrasive at times, but there's no way you can get rid of them. I just need them to play nice with the softies in the office. They might not be as understanding of the situation. I pondered. I suppose you're right. I can play damage control if I see something happening. I grabbed some thick mitts that were hanging on a cupboard handle above the counter. I slipped them on and removed the food from the oven. I slid 1 tin and utensil over to Sarah and began mixing my mixture of meat, vegetables, and sauce together. We ate in relative silence before Sarah excused herself and slinked into her room. Hers is the only room on the first floor, attached to the wall next to the kitchen area. I idly parsed through web pages on my phone. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. Maybe I was hoping I would find something novel and interesting, something to spark my brain back into running on all cylinders. Felt like I was dieseling on fumes. No dice. Might as well follow Sarah's lead and go to bed. Evan and Emily wouldn't be home until later. The quiet chime of my alarm roused me from sleep. I propped myself up in bed and listened to the simple ditty march on. It was early. Looking through the window showed that the sun wouldn't be up for another hour or so. I liked getting up early to collect rations. All the good cases were still available, and the lines were far shorter. I just didn't appreciate that decision right at this instant. Finally getting enough motivation to commit, I whipped off the blanket and trudged over to my desk near the foot of my bed, where my phone was alarming, and silenced it. Coffee was a consistent morning companion. It gave me something to do in the mornings where I would rather still be in bed. Having an idle task woke me up more than the caffeine. My caffeine habits were largely eclipsed by Sarah's in this household. Strung like a tightrope that woman was sometimes. I stood in the kitchen, enjoying my brew, absent-mindedly staring off. After gulping down the gritty dregs at the bottom, I returned to my room and got my day clothes on. Most of my clothes were simple and utilitarian, plain-colored long-sleeve shirts and medium-weight work pants festooned with pockets of various sizes. I slipped into my usual uniform and grabbed my wallet off my desk, depositing it in my right hip pocket. Returning downstairs, I started donning the rest of what I needed to leave the house. The thermal suits weren't mandated to be worn outside until November, but if I would be taking the jet sled, the extra warmth would be welcome. I hoisted my suit off the hook rack near the front door. Each of the housemates had a different color suit and matching full-face helmet. Because residents of Reaper Point were required to wear both while outside for nearly half the year, personalizing the heavy canvas suits and helmets was a cultural point of passion. I'm not the most artistically motivated person, so I left mine the natural tan color for the suit and black helmet. I did take the liberty to add more pockets to the outside of the suit, though. always one for functionality. The suit was zippered to a set of boots and gloves at the end of the legs and arms, creating a single garment with individually sized components. I slipped into the legs and seated my feet in the boots, then fastened the suit's belt around my waist, holding up the weight of the trouser section. I slid into the arms and fastened up the front zipper. Adding a balaclava and donning the helmet finished the procedure. Feeling armored to the nines, I trudged my way to the garage door and stepped outside. The garage was a small, enclosed space, roughly 3 by 5 meters, with a vertical sliding door on my left. The temperature was above outside ambient, but it was by no means warm. Contained within the garage were a couple miscellaneous items like snow shovels and ice chippers in a rack along the far wall. More importantly was our main motorized transportation, the jet sled. It was a machine about 2.5 meters long and 1 meter wide. It had a sloping hourglass shape when viewed from the top, with a wide aerodynamic front fairing extending the first quarter of the craft, and a similarly shaped tail. The pilot sat on a raised saddle portion in the narrow center and steered with handlebars. The whole bottom of the machine was one continuous articulating tank track that provided the traction. To steer, the vehicle hinged at the center and arced the tread from front to back. I was quite fond of the old girl. I had bought it from someone who was retiring and moving out of Reaper Point shortly after I arrived. It wasn't particularly nice, or even that reliable, but I had grown attached to it over the year that I'd lived here. I reflected on the peculiarity of being more attached to a machine than many of the people that I've met here, but didn't dwell on it. I had detached the high-pressure cryogenic fuel line from the fitting on the front fairing and slid over a passive trailer sled that I would transport the supplies on. It's securely attached to the rear of the powered sled on a swivel joint. I flipped a switch to open the bay door. It elevated with small squeaks escaping the frigid metal mechanism. The wind swept in dusty snow under the door as it lifted, lit by the first rays of sunlight. I straddled the vehicle and grabbed the right grip and used the attached thumb lever to pulse the throttle while I stomped my left foot on the kickstart. The turbine engine started with a pop and a crescendo of the telltale whistle to idle. I moved the gear selector lever on the left side of the fairing to reverse and began backing out into the street. Calling Reaper Point a city is a bit of a misnomer. The settlement had been created almost a century ago as a volcanology and seismology research site called the Reaper Point Volcanology Research Settlement. It exists at the tip of a peninsula on the slopes of a near-kilometer-tall mountain that was exhibiting active and novel geographic phenomenon. The mountain is surrounded by water on the north, west, and south faces, connected to land only on the east side. As the settlement grew, it started to form an hourglass shape, centering at the summit and expanding down the east and west faces. Today, the Reaper Point Volcanology Association is the governing body, landlord, and place of employment for nearly all of the roughly 2,000 permanent residents living in the city. The RPV Association erected the hundreds of general-purpose scientific, industrial, residential, and recreational facilities all out of the blandest gray concrete imaginable. Structures have the appearance of being packed into the very earth, with fillets of snow forming in every corner and crease. The vehicle and foot traffic in Reaper Point are forced to travel on paths of hard-packed snow in between the buildings. The west side is now largely abandoned, as the weather coming off the ocean was too inclement to make sustaining presence worth it long term. All of the city's basic necessities must be imported via train once a month. The train arrives on midnight of the first Friday of the month. The workers at the station are given 48 hours to unload the hundreds of tons of materials and supplies before the train leaves Sunday at midnight. The train had just arrived last night. I backed the sled out of the garage and lined it up with the street. Setting the gear selector lever to forward low range resulted in a mechanical clunk from beneath my seat. My throttle hand was feeling a little mischievous. I braced against the bolster at the back of the saddle and slowly spooled up the engine. As I dumped the clutch, the craft bucked and surged forward, snow blasting behind as the tread scrambled and clawed for traction. The acceleration was a rush, the buildings blurring in my vision and the falling snow becoming streaks of white. I enjoyed the recklessness for a moment before letting sensibility take control and slowing to a reasonable speed. I was heading perpendicular to the slope of the mountain. All of the roads are laid out like a Christmas tree. One main route directly up the mountain in the center, with branching streets laterally. This recognizable shape gave the streets the names of trunk and branches, the latter of which is labeled 1 through 17. The housing complex that I lived in was a little over halfway up on branch 11. Approaching the crossroads brought the most recognizable feature of Reaper Point, the lift, into view. It was a gondola-style elevated cable car system that ferried foot traffic up and down the slope. It originates at the train station at the base and travels along the trunk street, over the summit, and ends at the ocean on the other side. I slowed the sled down as I approached the intersection. There wasn't much traffic this early in the morning. As I pulled up to merge and head down the trunk, I could see a couple other people taking their sleds down to the station, and a couple more people riding the lift. Looking at the summit showed it shrouded in blowing snow and fog. The gondolas of the lift slowly disappeared into the turbulent white void. The flashing lights that outlined the massive communications tower jutting out of the peak were only barely visible. I turned the craft to the right and headed down the trunk. It's far wider than any of the branches, easily wide enough for 6 sleds side by side, or 2 of the larger tracked cargo vehicles that ferried supplies up and down. There aren't many landmarks in Reaper Point, as all of the buildings look roughly the same, so all of the branches have large color-coded signs as they meet the trunk. The slope started to level out as I passed branch 3, 2, 1, and exited the city. The train station came into view as a long metal and concrete structure perpendicular to the trunk. The walls were segmented trapezoidal blocks of concrete with a domed metal roof ribbed with reinforcing hoops. There were 3 large openings in the wall facing the city, the middle one about twice as wide as the side ones. The colossal, sleek, stainless steel train could be seen through these loading bays, resting on its tracks. Steam billowed from vents along its length and from the hinged open tops of some of the train cars. I pulled up in the rightmost bay of the station and parked my sled next to 2 others. Once the whistle of the turbine had ceased, I could hear the activity in the station. Conversation between workers, mechanical clanking of various machines, and the hiss of the train venting filled the cavernous space. There was a table near where I parked with 2 workers stationed behind computer monitors. I hopped off the sled and approached, lifting the visor of my helmet so I could be heard. Hi, I'm here for ration pickup. Kev Habersetzer. The worker prodded a number of large, oversized buttons behind the computer. Still in the house with 4 full-time residents on branch 11? He inquired. I affirmed. He paused. Oh, you're living with, Dr. Beckman. That must be something. She's really not that bad once you get to know her. I'll take your word for it. Preference on your crate selection? Got any K cases? Sure do. They normally go fast, so I'm glad you're here now. You get 3 cases for the month. Do you want all K or a variety? He had gotten up from his chair and moved to a stack of thin metal tickets. Yeah, could you do 2K and 1B? I instructed after some thought. You got it, Chief. He grabbed 3 metal tickets, then leaned over the table to give them to me. Pull your sled around and they'll load you up. I received the tickets and motioned my thanks before walking back to the sled. I fired it up and drove it to the right-hand side of the middle bay. I positioned the trailer sled in a marked red box on the floor, slid the tickets into a console, and waited while an overhead gantry crane picked the half-meter cubed crates out of the top of a train car with a mechanized claw. Once loaded, I pulled a U-turn and headed home. I started getting lost in thought while I piloted the sled home. Nothing in particular stood out. Thoughts entered and exited in a constant stream. Modifications to the bracket I was designing, how to keep the shop guys at work from chewing people out, if I should repaint my room for how much time I spend there, I arrived home. I opened the garage door with a large switch on the exterior of the building and backed the trailer sled in first. Opening the door to the first floor living area revealed it empty, but I knew people were home. "Hey team, come help me unload," I barked into the house as I took off my helmet and flipped another switch to close the garage door. Sarah exited her room wearing her usual pajamas, a blue tank top and black sweatpants. She closed the door and gave me a swift hello nod before grabbing a coat from a hook just outside her room and slipping some shoes on. Pounding footsteps from upstairs preluded the arrival of Emily from her room. She was about my age, short, stocky, and had rounded features. She wore tight jeans and a gray t-shirt with a simple graphic design on it. Her long brunette hair was tied in a loose bun. "Morning, Kev!" she exclaimed while waving one of her small hands enthusiastically. I mimicked the silly motion back. "Morning." I paused for a moment before asking, "Where's your brother?" "Probably still asleep," she shrugged. "Doesn't surprise me," I said before raising my voice to the whole house. "You know how goddamn lazy he is." I smiled mischievously and waited. A muffled, "Fuck off," could be heard emanating from the basement. I chuckled and followed the sound down the stairs. The basement was a single rectangular room about 5 by 7 meters. The stairs run parallel to a short end with a swift 90-degree turn at the end to enter the room. The furniture was limited. There was a head-height dresser on the long wall to my left, topped by a projector facing the opposite wall. In the center of the room was a black futon facing the wall that would be projected on. Various electrical cables and cords littered the floor. Evan was sleeping on the futon as he always did. "Hey buddy, you gonna help out?" I called to him from the threshold of the stairs. He groaned and rolled off the futon onto the floor with a thud, then peeled himself off the floor to a standing position and threw off the blanket that still draped over him. He was only wearing baggy synthetic shorts. Evan had gotten the same stocky jeans from his sister, but had also gotten height. Despite him being younger, he was still a noticeable amount taller than myself. He was built thick, with wide shoulders and a depth to his upper torso that was reminiscent of a bodybuilder. Despite this connotation, he was far from lean. "Morning, sunshine," I said, grinning. "Thanks, Dad," he grumbled. That only made me grin wider. He was easy to get a rise out of. "Well, get some clothes on and get upstairs." He looked around at his room, noting no easy clothing to be found, and just started walking towards the stairs. "Fuck it, I'll just be cold." I shrugged as he started up the stairs, intentionally bumping into me on his way past. Once upstairs with everybody in differing levels of decency, I opened the door to the garage and led the other trio out. "So I got 2 K cases and 1 B case," I explained as we filed out. I could see Evan's satisfaction in the former. "Emily, could you grab this side while I grab the other?" I prompted. We grabbed 2 opposite sides of the crate and hoisted it over the back of the trailer sled and shuffled our way back towards the living area. Evan tiptoed his bare feet on the freezing floor to the next crate, wrapped it in a bear hug, and picked it up by himself. He lumbered his way into the house and set it down next to the freezer where Emily and I had placed ours. I jogged back into the garage to help Sarah, who had already slid the last crate from the sled to the floor. I grabbed one end, and together we brought the last one in. Evan had gone back downstairs to find some clothes, and I brought the crowbar in from the garage. "What have you guys been up to today?" I asked while I started prying at the nails holding the lids on the crate. Emily replied first. "Not much. Slept in, watched some TV. Good weekend vibes." "Sounds relaxing." I turned to Sarah. "How's your simulations been going?" She thought for a second. "Interesting. The analysis isn't corroborating what we've been picking up with the few sensors we have in the area, but I'm pretty sure my simulations are correct. I probably only have an hour or 2 more today for the simulation, actually." "Wow, that might be the first time I've heard you tell me that you don't have work to be doing," I replied somewhat sarcastically. "Ah, not so fast, Buster," she smirked. It also means that I have to make an expedition to take more data tomorrow. She mimed a celebratory motion. That's more consistent with what I know. I was getting worried for a second. I rubbed her shoulder in fake sympathy, and she slapped it off. Evan returned from the basement to review the food items we were in the middle of packing away. The only change of attire was the addition of a white t-shirt and socks. It baffled me how it took him so long to find so little. I call dibs on at least 5 of those steaks from the K cases, he said as he made his way over to us. No worries, dude. That's why I got 2. I replied, while pulling the last of the packages out from the first case and started prying open the second. What have you been up to today, Evan? Fucking nothing, he barked back. Nothing cool has happened since broomball season ended in June. What? I replied in mock surprise. You're telling me prep school isn't the pinnacle of entertainment? He scoffed. Yeah, and it got way worse this year after all my friends graduated. It was barely palatable with them. I relented. Yeah, I know what you mean. There was a pause while Emily and Sarah picked through the new packages. I spoke up. Well, if you're so fixated on broomball, do you want to go to the rinks in the sports center after lunch and get some practice in? He lit up. Please, anything to get me out of this house. Conversation with Evan was harder than I would like. We talked a lot, and the well-intentioned ribbing we often partook in would imply that we were great friends. But there was a distinct lack of serious conversation that was enough to make me wonder sometimes. Maybe we just didn't have enough similarities and interests to sustain anything but verbal jousting. I tried not to worry about it too much, probably just how he was. Evan and I were both silently riding one of the gondolas on the lift, which was on its way down to Branch 4 where the sports center was. We were kitted out in our team jerseys, pads, and fiberglass brooms. I, for one, looked far more competent than I actually was at the game. All 4 of the housemates played on the same team, the Brick Smashers, Evan's choice. We had to pull a random 5th for goalie every season because we couldn't find a consistent member to play that position. Every spring, there was a round-robin style tournament with all the teams from Reaper Point. Evan, being one of the few natives of Reaper Point, had taken great pride in playing every year. He was by far the most skilled member on our team, both from playing the game his whole life and because athletics was one of his few points of interest. So what do you want to practice on today? I asked, trying to broach the silence as we were ferried down by the lift. He thought. Well, the season is a long way away, so we don't have to practice any game-related stuff like strategies. I'd say we could work on some movement on the ice and simple ball handling. Good basics, and get some exercise in. I nodded, and he continued. I wish we managed to get Emily to come along. She needs to work on staying upright when she takes shots. I chuckled. At least she's committed to taking them. He snorted. Yeah, we'll take what we can get. The gondola was approaching the Branch 4 platform, so we gathered up our stuff and stepped out as the gondola slid past and continued descending. The sports center was a large building similarly constructed to the train station. Thick concrete walls bordered the long rectangular footprint, and it was all capped off by the same semicircular ribbed metal roof. I suspect this building had been built for some other intent and got repurposed as an athletics facility when the city expanded. The building ran axial to the branch, with the metal double doors and overhead large plastic sign that marked the front entrance on one of the short ends. We entered and approached the front desk located on the left of the foyer. Evan showed his school ID, and I showed my work ID to prove that we had access to the facility before walking through the doors to the right of the desk to enter the arena. The arena was the largest single enclosed room in the city. It spanned the entire width of the sports center and roughly half the length. It houses the 4 permanent broomball rinks. Broomball ice rinks are roughly 25 meters long and 15 meters wide, with chamfered corners and small goals on either end. 2 teams of 5 players compete to score a small 15-centimeter diameter ball in the opposing team's goal. Players must wear flat-bottom shoes on the ice, and the low traction that provides determines a large part of the strategy of the game. Looking out over the rinks from the slightly elevated circumnavigating walkway showed a team practicing on the far rink and a couple people running drills on the rink next to that. We walked up to the third rink, grabbed a couple balls from rinkside, and deposited them within. Evan instructed, "Just get warmed up for now." I hopped over the wall and started shuffling across the rink, getting a feel for the ice again. Evan did the same, but was almost sprinting from side to side while he warmed up. We began practicing movement drills. Changing direction on the rink was the primary focus, sometimes using the walls to aid quick redirection. Then we incorporated ball control while changing directions. Evan always told me that staying agile on the ice was the defining feature of a good solo player. Evan was a good solo player, and I was always amazed at the speed he was able to travel with control over himself and the ball. The drills went fast, and I was out of breath constantly despite being relatively fit. Evan would inevitably complete the drill prior to me and be propped up on the rink wall catching his own breath by the time I had even made it back. He would just smile with a good-natured competitiveness at watching me suffer behind him. Suited me just fine. I needed to improve anyways. After practice, we strolled out of the sports center. Steam was visibly rolling off of us in the crisp, still evening air. We made our way back to the lift platform and hitched a ride on the next gondola that swung past. We sat on opposite sides, and I looked out of the window idly. I had a curiosity come to mind, and I looked over to Evan. "It seems odd to me that you're more than willing to put effort into athletics, but when it comes to schooling, you barely try." He looked at me perplexed, as if I had asked a dumb question. "It's just also worthless. It's all busy work, and it always has been that way," he replied as he went back to staring out his side of the gondola. "I don't know, man. Maybe if you put more effort in, it would start to pay back enough to make it worth it." He shrugged. "Maybe." I left it at that. It was clear he didn't want to hear it. We quickly arrived back at Branch 11, dismounted the gondola, and walked the short distance back to the house. Upon us entering the first floor, Sarah poked her head out of her room. "Get over here, Habissetzer," she commanded. "What's up?" I replied. I thought about being sarcastic, but she clearly was in work mode, and I thought better of it. Evan silently mouthed good luck at me before retreating downstairs. Sarah opened her door all the way and posted herself in the opening. She was postured as tall and wide as her frame would allow. I approached and waited expectantly. None of my research team is able to join me in the expedition tomorrow, and I'm beyond pissed. It's their fucking job. She softened a bit. "I know it's outside of your area of expertise, but it's too dangerous to go alone, and we need to do it now." I couldn't really turn her down. "Sure, just tell me what to bring." This concludes today's assembly. Tune in again for more of Reaper Point Volcanology. Until next time, have a good one.